May 27, 1980, 3:12 a.m., Medford, Massachusetts. The street outside Depositors Trust Bank was silent, except for the faint hum of a streetlight and the echo of carnival music drifting from 2 blocks away. Inside, behind 18 inches of reinforced concrete, the vault slept, a fortress of cash, diamonds, and over 1,000 safety deposit boxes. On paper, it was unbreakable. That night, it wasn't. A small team had been inside for hours, crawling through a dusty crawl space above the vault. They had bypassed a silent alarm wired directly to the police station and drilled through concrete that was never meant to be touched. Sandbags muffled the thud of a controlled blast. Sparks from an acetylene torch hissed in the darkness as a narrow hole finally opened above the vault. One by one, masked figures dropped through the ceiling and landed on the cold floor below. Their lookout was not across the street. He was Sergeant Tom Doherty, the senior officer on duty that night, the very man the city trusted to protect the bank. From his patrol car, he radioed a calm, "All clear," pushing away anyone who might get too close. Inside, his partners moved with methodical precision. Steel doors hissed as hinges were forced apart. Box after box cracked open. Jewelry, gold coins, and stacks of cash disappeared into duffel bags. The air was thick with dust and adrenaline. By dawn, they were gone. No alarms, no witnesses, no fingerprints. 1,000 boxes stood empty, and nearly $10 million in cash and valuables had vanished without a trace. When bank staff opened the vault Tuesday morning, they froze. Piles of shredded metal and paper reached their knees. The vault's ceiling had a gaping wound, and yet the silent alarm, the one wired straight to the police, had never gone off. It looked less like a burglary than a magic trick, and the FBI, called in within hours, had nothing. No tools, no prints, no suspects, just an empty vault and a single question: who could have done this? But this wasn't where the story began. To understand how a group of men could tear open a fortress in the middle of a quiet Massachusetts town and walk away untouched, we have to go back. Back to the start of Jerry Clemente's double life. Before we dive into the story of one of the most shocking bank heists in American history, a crew led by a police captain who cracked a vault and vanished with nearly $10 million, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment with your city or country. I want to see where you're watching from. And tell me, do you think a crime like this could still happen today? Now buckle up, because this story isn't fiction, it's real. And it begins in a quiet Massachusetts town on a Memorial Day weekend in 1980. In the early 1970s, Medford, Massachusetts was a picture of small-town order. Police cruisers traced the same streets at the same hours. Officers knew the names of bank tellers and grocery clerks. The night shift drank the same lukewarm coffee from the same paper cups. It was a place where rules were clear and where people trusted those who enforced them. Jerry Clemente believed in that order when he pinned on his badge in 1970. The son of a factory worker, he had grown up believing that a police officer was the backbone of a community. On his first night, he learned a lesson that would define his career. He and a veteran partner stopped a man sprinting down the street with a stolen lawn chair. Clemente prepared to arrest him. The veteran waved the man off with a laugh. He was a fellow officer. "Two things," the older cop told him. "If a cop's carrying something, mind your own business, and don't play high and mighty." That was the unwritten law, and Clemente absorbed it. There was the official version of justice. And then there was the one cops actually lived by. Clemente proved himself quickly. He was calm under pressure, wrote meticulous reports, and earned a medal for bravery after disarming an armed suspect during a tense standoff. Neighbors saw a family man with a wife, children, and a tidy home. In the department, he was known as a solid officer who could be trusted with difficult cases. But there was another side. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Clemente began taking small things. Seized goods from raids that disappeared into his garage, favors exchanged quietly among colleagues. It started as a piece of furniture. Then it was a stereo. Nothing violent, nothing reckless. Just a small step across an invisible line. A line that felt easier to cross each time. His motives weren't desperate. He wasn't drowning in debt or driven by tragedy. What pulled him forward was something colder: control, power, and the knowledge that he could bend the system to his will. And he wasn't alone. In 1978, he partnered with Sergeant Tom Doherty, a brash, volatile cop known for pushing his authority too far. Together, they staged their first major scheme: stealing the police promotional exam before it was administered, selling copies for $5,000 apiece to ambitious officers. It was simple, profitable, and undetectable. The scheme worked, and it gave them influence inside police departments across the region. They weren't just breaking the rules, they were rewriting them. The small scams grew bolder. Clemente recruited Joe Banks, a dependable man with a knack for heavy lifting; Brother O'Leary, a well-connected gangster who could move stolen goods discreetly; and Bucky Barrett, a meticulous alarm specialist who spoke little and worked clean. This wasn't a crew built for noise. It was built for precision. By 1980, one building in Medford drew Clemente's attention more than any other: Depositors Trust, the wealthiest bank in the area. Inside, behind time-locked steel doors, sat a vault with 18 inches of reinforced concrete, a web of steel mesh, and a silent alarm wired both to a private security firm and directly to the Medford police station. Within were thousands of double-key safety deposit boxes, and at the rear, a secure cash safe. On paper, it was impenetrable, but Clemente didn't look at paper. He looked for patterns. Tom Doherty had a safety deposit box inside Depositors Trust. On each visit, he studied the building. He counted his steps from the vault door to the rear wall. He listened to the hollow echo beneath the ceiling. He noticed vents, switches, and shadows. Above the vault, he realized there was no sky, just an attic crawl space in the small shop next door. It was quiet, dusty, and overlooked. To Clemente, it was an opportunity. For weeks, he drove the block late at night and wrote down everything he saw: delivery trucks, bar closings, the first morning bus. Every predictable habit was another piece of the puzzle. And then the calendar handed him the final piece: Memorial Day weekend. 3 nights, one long window. The bank would close on Saturday and not reopen until Tuesday morning. In a business built on routine, that was the biggest weakness of all. He calculated the potential reward. The cash safe might be lighter if funds were sent to the Federal Reserve before the holiday, but the safety deposit boxes would stay full. Old leases, private wealth, diamonds, cash, documents, locked away and unguarded. 1,000 boxes could easily hold $10 million or more. It wasn't a fantasy, it was math. 2 rules guided Clemente from the start. First, everything that entered the scene would leave with them. No tools, gloves, or screws would remain behind. Second, if anything looked wrong, any sign that the routine had changed, they would walk away, no matter how much time they'd invested. Success depended on patience and precision, not boldness. One night, Clemente quietly picked the back door of the shop next to the bank and climbed into its attic. Lying flat on a wooden beam, he felt the distance between the crawl space floor and the vault ceiling. He checked the fuse box. Clean copper, steady current. He left without disturbing a single object. Outside, the streetlight hummed. No one noticed. By mid-May, the flaw was clear. The bank's strength, its thick walls, silent alarm, and rigid routine, was also its weakness. The alarm could be fooled if Barrett could isolate the signal and mimic it. The vault could be breached from above if the ceiling could be reached undetected. The streets could be controlled if Doherty used his badge to make police presence look ordinary. What Clemente didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the dust on his sleeve from the attic beam, a trace that would one day betray him. On a quiet night, Clemente slid his notes under a pile of old case files in his basement. He marked Memorial Day weekend on his calendar. The plan wasn't complete, but the path was set. The flaw had been found. The window was chosen. And soon the vault that everyone believed was untouchable would be within reach. The idea began not with dynamite or drills, but with a quiet observation. Banks were built to keep people out, but their greatest protection was also their greatest weakness: routine. Every lock turned at the same hour. Every guard shift followed the same path. Every signal wire hummed the same way, day after day. If you could understand that rhythm deeply enough, you could bend it without breaking it. Jerry Clemente's attention focused on depositors' trust, the wealthiest bank in Medford, and the one most confident in its own invincibility. Its vault was a marvel of 20th century engineering, 18 inches of reinforced concrete lined with a steel mesh, a time-locked steel door, a silent alarm wired both to a private monitoring company and directly to the Medford Police Department. Inside were more than 1,000 safety deposit boxes and a secure cash safe. For years, it had been described as impenetrable. Clemente no longer believed that word existed. It was Tom Doherty who handed him the first piece of the puzzle. Because Doherty rented a safety deposit box inside the bank, he had legitimate access to the vault area. On his visits, he did more than check on valuables. He memorized. He paced off distances, noted the locations of fuse boxes, vents, and wiring conduits. He pressed his palm against the plaster above the vault and listened to the hollow space beyond. A plan began to form. The vault could not be breached from the front or the sides, but from above, from a crawl space few even knew existed. It might be possible. The alarm posed a greater challenge. It was silent, direct, and redundant. One line to the bank's monitoring company, one to the police station. If triggered, police would arrive before anyone inside even knew they'd been detected. That meant Clemente needed a specialist. He turned to Bucky Barrett, a man whose reputation among burglars was built on two things: patience and precision. Barrett spent weeks studying similar alarm systems, examining how their signals traveled and how they could be fooled. He proposed a device that could mimic a healthy signal while the real circuit was cut, a crude but effective bypass box. It would require careful testing, but if it worked, the bank's security system would report everything as normal while they worked inside. For 2 months, Barrett and Clemente returned to the bank at night to test wires hidden behind a maintenance panel in the rear wall. They worked slowly, tracing each line individually to identify the one that carried the alarm signal. Some nights they left with nothing more than a few new notes. On others, they tripped minor sensors and were forced to retreat and wait. They changed cars, altered their routes, and logged every patrol pattern on the block. Each near failure taught them more about the system they were trying to defeat. The building itself revealed another opportunity. A small shop shared a wall with the bank. Its attic was old, cramped, and largely unused, but it sat directly above the vault. Clemente tested the lock on the shop's back door and found it could be picked quietly. Once inside, he measured the crawl space and realized they could access the vault ceiling from above without being seen from the street. That ceiling, 18 inches of reinforced concrete with a mesh core, would not yield easily. But Clemente had no intention of forcing it in a single night. He also needed to know how sound carried in the neighborhood. He drove the block at 1 a.m., then again at 2:15 and 3 a.m. He timed the gaps between patrol cars, noted which streetlights flickered, and when delivery trucks arrived for the bakery down the street. He learned that on most nights the block was silent after 2:30 a.m. and stayed that way until 5:01. That window was narrow, but it was enough. Then the calendar offered them a gift: Memorial Day weekend. With the bank closed from Saturday evening until Tuesday morning, they would have more than 72 hours of darkness, and a city distracted by parades and carnival noise. The cash itself presented one uncertainty. Large sums were typically transferred to the Federal Reserve before long weekends, which meant the main cash safe might hold less than usual. But the safety deposit boxes, more than 1,000 of them, would remain. Inside could be anything: cash, jewelry, bearer bonds, heirlooms. A single box might hold $20,000. 1,000 could hold 10 million or more. That calculation turned the plan from a gamble into a strategy. By mid-May, Clemente's notebooks were filled with diagrams, patrol logs, and timing charts. He identified 3 potential weak points in the plan. First, the alarm bypass might fail under load, triggering the police response instantly. Second, the blast required to breach the vault ceiling might be heard, drawing attention. Third, returning to the site after the first night, if necessary, would multiply their risk. Each risk had to be addressed before the plan could proceed. Barrett built and rebuilt the bypass box in his workshop, refining it until it could mask the cut signal for several hours without interruption. Clemente sourced industrial sandbags to direct and muffle the blast, testing them in an abandoned quarry. Doherty rehearsed his part, imagining the questions he might face if anyone reported unusual noise. Routine, Clemente told him. You are routine. You are what they expect to see. There were close calls. One night, a patrol cruiser lingered longer than usual near the alley behind the bank. Barrett froze in place for nearly 30 minutes, pressed against a wall with a bundle of wire in his hands, until the cruiser moved on. Another night, a motion sensor tripped unexpectedly during a test, forcing them to flee on foot and circle back hours later to recover their tools. But the most dangerous moment came when a pair of restaurant owners arrived late at night to conduct inventory. Doherty, on duty that evening, intercepted them and sent them home with a stern warning about recent break-ins. They thanked him for his vigilance. He returned to the radio and whispered, "Clear." By the third week of May, the team was confident. The alarm system could be bypassed. The ceiling could be reached. The noise could be disguised by the chaos of Memorial Day festivities. And the police presence on the street could be explained by a uniformed officer doing his job. One detail slipped through Clemente's careful control. During one of his final attic inspections, he brushed concrete dust from a beam onto his sleeve. It seemed trivial, a smear he wiped away with his hand before climbing down. But traces of that dust clung to the fibers of his uniform and would later become a piece of evidence that investigators could not ignore. For now, it was invisible, like the plan itself. By late May, the flaw in the depositor's trust was no longer an idea. It was a map, a space no one watched, a signal no one questioned, a pattern no one had thought to break. Clemente closed his notebook, placed it beneath a pile of old reports in his basement, and circled a date on the calendar. Memorial Day weekend. The vault that had been untouchable for decades was about to meet someone who no longer believed in impenetrable. By the final week of May 1980, the plan was no longer theory. Jerry Clemente had identified the flaw, mapped the vault, and studied every habit around depositors' trust. Now the operation had to become real. That meant tools, timing, and people. And every choice had to fit into a system that would collapse if even one piece failed. The crew assembled in a small garage 2 miles from the bank. It was an ordinary space. Oil stains on the floor, tools hanging from hooks, the kind of place no one would notice driving past. Around an old folding table, Clemente laid out the plan. 72 hours, he said. That's our window. Saturday night to Tuesday morning. In and out clean. No alarms, no noise, no evidence. Tom Doherty would be their shield, a uniformed sergeant on duty, patrolling the streets, turning away anyone who came too close. Joe Banks and Brother O'Leary would handle the heavy lifting, hauling equipment and opening deposit boxes. Barrett would be responsible for the alarm, the most fragile part of the plan. Clemente himself would coordinate every stage. Each man knew his part, but knowing was not enough. They rehearsed. Over several nights, they broke into an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town and treated it as a stand-in for the bank. They practiced bypassing a mock alarm system built from salvaged parts. Barrett timed himself on how quickly he could isolate a signal and install the bypass box. At first, it took him 22 minutes. Far too long. By the third night, he could do it in under 12. Banks and O'Leary practiced prying open reinforced boxes. Their first attempts left metal twisted and loud. Clemente pushed them to find quieter methods. Eventually, they learned that striking hinge points with a heavy chisel produced less noise and faster access than forcing locks directly. Clemente obsessed over timing. He charted how long it took for Barrett to cut a signal, how long the sandbags would need to be placed around the dynamite, how long it would take to drill through 18 inches of reinforced concrete. Every second mattered. No delays, he repeated. If we fall behind schedule, we walk. We don't improvise. The first near disaster came during a routine drive-by surveillance of the bank. Doherty, off-duty and in plain clothes, noticed a new patrol route assigned to a rookie officer, one that passed directly behind the alley where the crew planned to enter. If that route remained, the plan would be exposed before it began. Doherty pulled strings, citing traffic flow concerns, and the route was quietly reassigned 2 days later. The alley was clear again. The second brush with failure happened inside Barrett's workshop. During a final test of the bypass box, a loose solder joint caused the signal to flicker, a glitch that would have instantly triggered the alarm during the heist. Barrett spent 3 sleepless nights rebuilding the device from scratch, replacing cheap components with military-grade relays sourced through a contact in New Jersey. The new unit held a steady signal for 8 hours straight. The third came when Clemente's reconnaissance nearly intersected with a civilian. On May 18th, he was inside the attic of the shop next to the bank, measuring the distance from the crawlspace floor to the vault ceiling, when a janitor arrived unexpectedly. Clemente froze in the shadows, barely breathing as footsteps creaked below. The man emptied trash bins and left. Clemente waited 15 minutes before slipping out the back door into the night. That brush with discovery convinced him to tighten the schedule even more. No unnecessary time inside, no second chances. As the weekend approached, the team began stockpiling equipment. Acetylene torches were procured under false names from a supplier in Worcester. Industrial carbide-tipped drill bits capable of chewing through concrete were packed into duffel bags. Magnesium-burning rods, capable of reaching 5,500 degrees, were added as a contingency. Clemente even secured sticks of dynamite from an old quarry operation, carefully packed and labeled to minimize risk. Each item was cataloged and stored in the garage, ready to be moved in a single trip. Doherty prepared his cover. Memorial Day weekend meant heightened police presence for public events, giving him the perfect excuse to patrol near the bank without suspicion. He adjusted his shift schedule to ensure he would be the senior officer on duty. If anyone reported a noise or suspicious activity, he would be the first responder, and he would make sure they left without asking more questions. Clemente's final planning session was held on the evening of May 23rd. The men gathered once again around the folding table, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and silence. "This is it," Clemente said. "We go in Saturday night. First task, Barrett cuts the alarm signal. We bypass the system and confirm the line is stable. Then we pick the lock on the back door of the shop and climb into the attic. That's our staging area." He traced each step on a hand-drawn diagram: drill points, fuse locations, and fallback routes. "We drill from above. We direct the blast downward with sandbags. We cut the mesh with the torch. Once we're in, Barrett starts on the main safe. Joe and O'Leary go for the deposit boxes." "And if anything goes wrong?" Barrett asked. Clemente didn't hesitate. "We walk. No hesitation. If we're not clear by dawn, we walk." The mood was focused, almost clinical. There were no grand speeches or promises, just a plan, polished by weeks of work and risk. Still, one detail lurked in the background, a detail none of them could see. The trace of concrete dust Clemente had brushed from his sleeve weeks earlier still clung to fibers deep in his uniform. It meant nothing now, but it would matter later, when investigators were desperate for any piece of evidence that tied the heist to a name. On the night before the operation, Clemente drove past Depositors Trust one last time. The building looked ordinary. Lights off, doors locked, silent. A clerk carried a box of documents to his car and drove away. A pair of teenagers walked past with bags of cotton candy from the carnival. The hum of summer traffic rolled down the street. To anyone else, it was just a bank on a quiet holiday weekend. To Clemente, it was a vault already halfway open. The window had been measured. The crew was ready. The tools were packed. All that remained was the night itself, and the question that every heist must face: could flawless planning survive contact with reality? May 24th, 1980. 11:47 p.m., Medford, Massachusetts. The streets around Depositors Trust were empty, lit by the yellow glow of sodium lamps. The carnival 2 blocks away had just shut down, and the noise of the crowd faded into distant laughter and car engines. In the alley behind the bank, a black panel van rolled to a stop without headlights. 4 men stepped out carrying canvas bags and tool cases. Inside a patrol car idling at the corner, Sergeant Tom Doherty lifted his radio to his mouth. "All clear," he said softly. "No movement." Jerry Clemente checked his watch. 72 hours. That was the window. They would either walk away rich or never walk again. 12:03 a.m. Barrett knelt at a maintenance panel hidden behind a dumpster at the rear of the building. His hands moved with practiced precision, stripping insulation from wires and attaching leads from a small metal box. Inside the box, indicator lights blinked green. The bypass was live. The bank's silent alarm, the one wired to both a private security company and the Medford police station, now reported everything as normal. Above them, the building was asleep. "Signal's clean," Barrett whispered. Clemente nodded. The first step was complete. 12:28 a.m. Clemente picked the back door of the small print shop adjacent to the bank. The lock clicked open without a sound. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with ink and paper dust. They moved through the narrow hallway and climbed into the attic crawlspace. Dust swirled in the glow of their flashlights. Beneath them, 18 inches of reinforced concrete separated them from millions of dollars in cash, jewelry, and secrets. Barrett checked the fuse box they had scouted weeks earlier. Clean current. Enough to power drills and torches. Clemente laid sandbags in a tight circle on the floor above the vault, each one carefully positioned to direct the blast downward and muffle the sound. Then he attached the dynamite. Every motion was deliberate. There were no second chances. 1:14 a.m. Clemente gave the order. Barrett twisted the detonator. The explosion was dull and deep, like distant thunder. A tremor shook the crawl space as a cloud of dust erupted around them. Down on the street, a dog barked. A window light flicked on and then off again. No sirens. No movement. Doherty's voice crackled over the radio. "Still clear." The blast had cracked the concrete, but left behind a stubborn web of steel mesh. Barrett lit the acetylene torch, its hiss filling the crawl space. The mesh glowed orange, then white, before surrendering. At 2:57 a.m., the last strand parted. Clemente peered through a jagged hole into the vault below. "Let's go," he said. One by one, they lowered themselves through the opening, boots crunching on the vault floor. The air inside was thick with dust and the sharp tang of burnt metal. Barrett moved to the large cash safe at the rear of the vault, firing up his torch again. O'Leary and Banks began working on the rows of safety deposit boxes, prying at hinges and forcing them open. Clemente checked his watch again. They had less than 3 hours until dawn. 3:46 a.m. Barrett cracked the safe. The heavy door swung open with a groan. Inside, just $60,000 in cash. Clemente stared at the bundles in silence. He had expected more. Hundreds of thousands. Maybe $1 million. It made sense. Before long weekends, most banks transferred excess cash to the Federal Reserve. He had known it was possible. But standing in that vault, the reality felt heavier. "Take it," Clemente said. "We come back tomorrow." 4:30 a.m. The men hauled their gear back up through the hole and sealed the attic door behind them. Doherty's patrol car drifted past the block one final time. The first hints of dawn colored the horizon. The vault was scarred but intact. No one would discover the breach until Tuesday morning. They had time. May 25th, 11:58 p.m. The crew returned, slipping once again through the back door of the print shop. The bypass box hummed without fault. The hole in the vault ceiling was just as they had left it. Clemente dropped down first, flashlight sweeping the floor. Everything was undisturbed. They set to work immediately on the deposit boxes. Their first attempts the previous night had been slow, up to 15 minutes per box. Tonight they switched methods. Instead of fighting the locks, Banks swung a heavy chisel at the hinges. Steel snapped under the blows, and doors popped free in seconds. The rhythm built: strike, pry, empty. Strike, pry, empty. One by one, the boxes surrendered. 1:42 a.m., near failure. A faint scraping sound echoed above them. Clemente froze. Footsteps. Someone was in the print shop. Barrett killed the torch. O'Leary doused the flashlight. Silence. Then Doherty's voice crackled in Clemente's earpiece. "False alarm. Cleaners. I sent them home." The work resumed. 2:56 a.m. They had opened over 400 boxes. Inside were cash envelopes, jewelry pouches, gold coins, and watches. A fortune hidden in plain sight. Each duffel bag grew heavier, and still they worked. 4:45 a.m., exhaustion set in. Barrett's hands shook as he handled the torch. O'Leary's back ached. Clemente called it. "We're done for tonight." They sealed the crawl space again and vanished into the dark. May 26th, 12:12 a.m. Their final night. By now, the operation was a machine. Barrett checked the bypass. Doherty confirmed the streets were clear. The team dropped through the ceiling and resumed their assault on the deposit boxes. The chisel method worked faster than they had dared hope. The sound of metal snapping echoed softly through the vault. 1:33 a.m. Barrett hit a snag. A stubborn hinge refused to break. He swung again. The chisel slipped, slicing his glove and nicking his hand. Blood spattered across the box's steel edge. Clemente stared at it, then barked, "Wipe it, now!" They scrubbed the surface with solvent and burned the rag in the torch flame. Nothing could remain. 2:58 a.m. Another near disaster. Doherty's voice on the radio was tight. "We've got a unit 2 blocks north, heading this way." Clemente ordered a full stop. Tools went silent. Lights went dark. They waited. 1 minute. 2. The patrol car slowed at the corner, then turned away. "Clear," Doherty breathed. Work resumed. By 4 a.m., they had broken into more than 1,000 safety deposit boxes. The floor was buried under torn metal and scraps of paper. The duffel bags were heavy with cash and jewels. Pink diamonds, rare coins, luxury watches, gold bars wrapped in velvet cloth. The weight of the haul strained their shoulders as they climbed back through the ceiling and sealed the crawl space behind them. 4:53 a.m., Doherty reported no movement on the streets. The panel van pulled away from the alley, its headlights still dark. The first pale light of dawn touched the rooftops of Medford as the city slept, unaware that one of the largest bank heists in New England history had just taken place. Tuesday, May 27th. 9:02 a.m. Bank employees unlocked the vault door and stepped inside. They stopped cold. The ceiling above them was ripped open. Piles of debris and shredded box doors covered the floor. Where cash and valuables once lay, there was emptiness. Nearly $10 million was gone. The alarm had never sounded. The police had never been alerted. The vault had been breached from above, a direction no one had thought to defend. The FBI arrived within hours. Evidence technicians swept every surface. There were no fingerprints, no tools, no fibers. It was as if the thieves had never been there at all. One investigator stared up at the jagged hole in the ceiling and shook his head. "It's like they disappeared." And in a way, they had. Clemente and his crew were gone. The duffel bags were hidden. The tools had vanished. The bank's most secure room had been emptied without a trace, and the men who had done it weren't shadowy outsiders. They were the very people sworn to protect the city. By the time Depositors Trust reopened on Tuesday morning, the vault looked like a battlefield. Shredded metal and paper covered the floor. 1,000 safety deposit boxes gaped open, empty and violated. Nearly $10 million in cash and valuables had vanished. The silent alarm had never gone off. There were no broken doors, no forced windows. It was as if the thieves had materialized inside the vault and disappeared the same way. The FBI was called within hours. Agents sealed off the scene, dusted every surface for prints, photographed every inch of the vault. There was nothing. No fingerprints, no tools, no footprints. The bypassed alarm line was intact and undisturbed. Whoever had done this had known the system intimately, or had help from someone who did. The investigation quickly focused on the possibility of an inside job. 2 names surfaced repeatedly: Sergeant Tom Doherty and Captain Jerry Clemente. Both had been on duty during the long Memorial Day weekend. Both had access to sensitive information. Both had reputations inside the department, clean on the surface, but whispered about in back rooms. Agents interviewed them separately. Both denied everything. They offered alibis, both airtight. Doherty claimed he had spent most of the weekend responding to minor calls near the carnival. Clemente said he had been with a woman named Barbara Hickey. Hickey confirmed the story. She told investigators Clemente had spent the night at her apartment and never left. Without physical evidence to contradict them, the FBI was stuck. The theory of police involvement made headlines, but theories didn't close cases. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. Surveillance teams followed Clemente, but he was careful. He used payphones instead of his home line. He changed his routes and routines daily. He seemed almost amused by the attention. "Arrogant," one agent later recalled. "He walked like we couldn't touch him." The case began to cool. Months turned into a year. Prosecutors privately admitted that unless new evidence surfaced, they might never make an arrest. The statute of limitations for burglary was approaching. If they couldn't charge Clemente before then, he would walk free forever. Then the plan began to unravel from the inside. Tom Doherty and Joe Banks, once trusted partners, were spiraling. Both were using cocaine heavily. Both were paranoid. They accused each other of talking to investigators. The tension exploded into violence. One night during an argument, Doherty pulled a gun and shot Banks in the shoulder. Banks survived, but the shooting brought state police to the scene. And with them, a discovery that would change everything. Inside Banks's car, officers found a kilo of cocaine. They also found jewelry. Rare pieces later identified as items stolen from safety deposit boxes at Depositors Trust. It was the first hard evidence linking the crew to the heist. Under pressure, Banks cracked. On the witness stand during Doherty's trial for the shooting, he admitted everything. "Yes, sir," he told the courtroom. "That was stolen jewelry. I stole it with your defendant on Memorial Day weekend, 1980. The room erupted. For the FBI, it was the break they had been waiting for. Still, one witness's testimony wasn't enough. Banks was a confessed criminal and drug user. A defense attorney could argue that he was lying to save himself. Investigators needed corroboration. They got it from an unexpected source. Barbara Hickey. Clemente had ended their relationship months earlier. Resentful and angry, she agreed to meet with investigators again. This time, she told them something she hadn't mentioned before. On one of the nights of the heist, Clemente had come home covered in dust. Cement dust, fine and gray, clinging to his clothes and hair. Would that matter, she asked the agents. It mattered more than she knew. It was the piece that tied Clemente to the vault breach. Dust from reinforced concrete like that could only have come from one place in Medford that weekend, the ceiling of Depositors Trust. With Banks's confession and Hickey's new testimony, prosecutors finally had enough to move. In early 1982, Jerry Clemente was arrested and charged with 4 counts of breaking and entering with intent to commit a felony. Doherty faced additional charges, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The headlines were explosive. Police captain charged in $10 million bank heist. Clemente's reaction was calm. He denied everything. He hired one of the best defense attorneys in Massachusetts. He told reporters the accusations were absurd and that he expected to clear his name. Even as the case moved to trial, he remained confident. He had covered his tracks. There were no fingerprints, no tools, no surveillance footage. And in his mind, testimony from a bitter ex-girlfriend and a wounded accomplice wasn't enough to convict him. But the prosecution had more than testimony. They had the jewelry from Banks's car. They had records showing Doherty's unusual patrol activity that weekend. They had concrete dust samples from Clemente's home that matched material from the vault ceiling. And, most damning of all, they had Hickey on the witness stand telling a jury that Clemente had returned home that night and told her he would never have to work another day in his life. The trial gripped Massachusetts. News cameras lined the courthouse steps. Columnists debated whether police corruption had reached its peak. Jurors watched as prosecutors laid out the story piece by piece. The bypassed alarm, the crawl space entry, the sandbag blast, the empty deposit boxes. It was, as one investigator described it, a perfect crime, undone by human weakness. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Jerry Clemente was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 30 to 40 years in state prison. Doherty was convicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy and assault with a deadly weapon. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Clemente showed no reaction. He stood still, jaw set, eyes fixed ahead. And even then, as the jury filed back into their seats and the judge prepared to speak, Jerry Clemente still believed they couldn't touch him.